Hello and welcome to this edition of Tri Talks. We're taking a few minutes, our conversation with community leaders across the sport of triathlon, and to give viewers that inner viewing of the sport. And I'm your host, Sebastian Portman. I'm the Executive Director with Triathlon Alberta. And with me today is Cody Osborne, who is one of our partners this season with Flexion Bike Fit. Cody, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what got you interested in fitting bikes?
Oh, well, thanks for having me this morning. I am an independent bike fitter here in Edmonton. Independent meaning I don't work out of a shop. I'm not affiliated with any fitting protocols per se. And my home-based studio's been around about 18 months and chugging along really well. I think things like the pandemic and a few other, serendipitous moments made me pretty busy right away. My background isn't competitive cycling whatsoever. I started actually in the music industry as a drum teacher, a musician, an author, and a music producer, and then went on to be a goalie coach. And I think things got closer and closer to bike fitting in that I've always, been in the service of other people. So helping them in a technical role. Getting a singer, guitar player to sound mint in the studio is a challenge. And getting a goalie to stop a 90-mile-an-hour slap shot is also takes a little bit of coercing. So in the bike fit studio, to get somebody to pedal smoothly, to feel more comfortable in aggressive position, to find their way is important. So the studio has been a really good place to exercise that background. Getting into bike fitting and what loves me about bike fitting, when you listen to other bike fitters talk about what they've done, the world-class bike fitters generally fall into one or two categories. They either had a problem that couldn't be solved, maybe a big injury, and they saw bike fitters and they just couldn't get it done, those other bike fitters, and they became a bike fitter, or they have a background in the sport. I was kind of in that first camp. I was a digital marketer and a goalie coach and began working with Calvin Berube, who ran Giant Edmonton. Great bike fitter, really, really good bike fitter. And he got rid of some really bad pain in my left foot, in particular the fifth med head, so that pinky toe knuckle on the left foot. There wasn't a lot of explanation as to what he was doing. I just know that his black magic voodoo made me really, really comfortable. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. We continued working together. I continued to kind of self-study bike fitting. I've since re-engineered or reverse engineered what he has done to my cleats. But it was that moment of like, wow, this is really neat stuff. And then that year, or just shortly after that bike fit, we had 3 bike shops close in Edmonton. And it was in 1 year. And it was like, wow, there's something going on here. I felt really compelled to kind of throw my wrench into the hat to try and do what I could to kind of keep the cycling community healthy. And then to do so by working with my hands. So I thought maybe I'd become a bike mechanic, but every bike mechanic I know is somewhat miserable. So I said, well, I love coaching goalies. I love working with athletes and people and serving people directly. Bike fitting is it. And with Calvin sort of stepping away and retiring, we were short a bike fitter. So I was certified in one protocol in November 2020. And yeah, I remember walking away. I stayed a little bit extra in Vancouver. I mean, Dave Howells was the instructor. He's just a beauty. He's a former carpenter, but 10 plus years in the business. He really stressed how good you have to be with your eye and how exceptional you have to be with people. And we'd have all these community members come in for these bike fits, and he'd stand behind you, big, tall guy, just big energy. And he'd say, Cody, what do you see, man? And like anything, you haven't developed your skills, your eyes, your ears, or whatever. And it was just like, wow, I don't know. Fast forward almost 2 years later, a rider walks into my studio, and the first thing I do is I generally listen to them, because there's always an asymmetry that's present in their pedal stroke. I'll open my eyes, and within seconds, I've got a laundry list of things that I would like to suggest and work mutually with them in the studio. And I always think back to those moments of like being brand new fitter and working with your eye. I mean, that's what Calvin did. There was lasers. At most, there was lasers. And those that know Calvin Berube, he was just a man of the people, ran a really good bike shop. The way I watched him fit others was the same way. It was just this careful eye, this art and science, this craftsmanship of getting to know the person, asking the goals, maybe some off the bike assessment, but seeing the rider in context. And I just think that's such a fascinating thing to do. People come in. I mean, I've had Tour de France stage winners. I've had riders racing bikes 29 years, bike couriers. I mean, they make a living on a bicycle, and yet no one's taken the time to just sit and watch them and go, wow, you've got a beautiful pedal stroke, but only on the right foot. We got to take care of this. Or, there's some ways that we can make things more comfortable for you. And so it's an honor and a privilege to do that, because when I got fit, it was like 20 minutes into a ride, my feet are just screaming at me. And then before you know it, I could ride a bike 100K. And that was a very proud moment and an emotional moment. And it came down to the work that a bike fitter did. So it was without question, it was like, this is something I want to do. So pretty steadfast on it, doing about 250, 300 bike fits a year. That's quite a bit from what I've uncovered from other fitters. Because the Edmonton community at large has been really supportive and knocking down my door pretty heavily.
Can you tell us a little bit of you've touched on a little bit, like the importance of that bike fit, but can you touch on that a little bit, like for anyone who races like recreationally, as well as like those that do race on the like a little bit more competitive side?
Yeah, it's self-serving to say that bike fitting is important. And when you study the bike fit industry the way I do, you see things differently. Like I'm a bike fitter. So all the heavy hitters, the bike fitters as I call them, coming from the music industry, they speak about bike fitting in a vastly different way than the retail bike fitting. Often when we get into retail fitting, it's great. It's all to serve the cyclist in a good way. It's just very heavy reliant on joint angles, which are super important, right? For the safety of the joint, for the longevity of the athlete, and then for muscle recruitment. But the elites, they dig somewhere different, and it's the brain-body-bike connection. We're all busy human beings, so I don't care whether you're on the bike for the first time. And I've had the wonderful privilege of working with riders who have never been clipped in, who've just started riding a bike, maybe due to the influence of friends or spouse or something. Yeah. And then I've had elite athletes. And it's important that you're getting a bike fit maybe annually, certainly for the first time, definitely if you're going to crest beyond, that 25 kilometer, 30 kilometer ride. You're going to have an experience in my fit studio where we uncover a little bit more about you as a human. Well, that's a big, bold statement for sure. We've uncovered with some riders that they activate the right side of their lower extremity. So they activate the glute, followed by the hamstring, and then their calf muscle perfectly. But then there's something going on with their left side. We have uncovered or confirmed what their physiotherapists have said in terms of maybe a twist in their shoulders. We've had riders come in who maybe went onto the University of YouTube and set their saddle 7 degrees nose up for whatever crazy reason. And we've remedied back pain. We've allowed a lot of people to enjoy the sport. I can account many, many stories. In fact, we had one guy, Fort McMurray. I was doing a pop-up studio, and the man came in. He said, "Cody, I'm a little bit heavier than I want to be. I've got 2 bikes I brought in today. One's my commuter, and one's my go and rip in these trails." Yeah. And his girlfriend was sitting on a chair, just kind of away from the studio where we were working, very quietly. I said, "Ma'am, where's your bike? Let's get you in here. Let's do this." And she said, "I like cycling, but every time I ride a bike with this guy, I can't walk for 3 days." And the look on his face was, "Yeah, man," you could read it in his face. He says, "I love cycling and I love this girl." And I said, "Well, why don't we audition new saddles?" Mm-hmm. And we tried 5 saddles, 4 of which were designed for female riders, if we could say that that's a thing. And she went, "Wow, that's the one." And the look on his face was, "Cool, man. Like, I feel great." Those moments of people being like, "Wow, this is really important to me. This is a sport that I use for staying physically fit, for being a kid and going on adventures, or whatever the case may be." And I have a pretty important role. A bike fit is crucial. 80% of people are on a saddle that doesn't fit or feel right. And we were not meant to bear weight in that part of our body. So I've taken a lot of time to master saddle fitting, if you can call it a thing. I don't measure sit bones. That's pretty common in certain environments. You just need to test saddles out with your body. And we need to do so at a rapid pace. I call it speed dating for saddles. So if you can walk away from a bike fit and we've adjusted your current saddle and it's the one, great. We're probably going to find things out about your technique that you didn't know about. Many riders have never seen themselves pedal a bike, certainly not on a trainer, certainly not from all 4 sides. And I'm always aiming to offer you an experience you've never done, even if you've had a bike fit. I mean, we had a gentleman come in. He's been racing bikes for a long time, Tour de France stage winner. He had never been on a fitting jig. Well, then that's where we had to go. I've had riders that come in and they've got not one bike fit report, but two. And it's like, cool. I can see everything. They saw something back then. The oldest report is, a couple years older. Let's take a look. But how do I give them a different experience that they've never done?
Yeah.
It's funny, like bike fitting is truly an experience. I'm going to pull up a quote from a bike fitter out of Florida. I saw this quote about 3 or 4 months into my career, and it just stopped me dead. I was like, wow, that's an incredible thought. And that night I sat in the fitting studio and I just kind of pondered it. Here's what he said. He's a great fitter. Like me, left the corporate world. He said, I have always felt a proper bike fit is about the experience. It's a coaching session mixed with fancy technology, equipment advice, mechanics, and cool stories. And that statement was like, woo-wee. How do you do that? So I'm constantly reading an athlete and trying to get them the most important thing that they've come in for. They'll fill out a questionnaire, so I'll know exactly what it is that we're trying to work towards. But I've really earned my keep, so to speak, if I've gone beyond that. And for some riders, they've said, wow, I didn't realize that my left shoulder dropped like that. Mm-hmm. Seeing that video, I could see that. Or wow, I thought I pedaled with nice, beautiful, straight up and down knees. They were doing all kinds of things. What do I do about that? And that's really where the essence of a bike fit, at least with me, comes in. I want to restore people's proprioceptive awareness. As human beings, we are totally all about our senses. What we see, hear, our balance. Being on a bicycle is not natural. And I've always said this. Nothing in the history of sports rewards bad technique like a bicycle. Your bicycle loves you. Mm-hmm. As such, I have a pretty important role to watch you pedal. I don't have a big cycling background. I don't need it. I just understand through study where the bike and the body need to work together. And all you're doing on a bike is hip extension and flexion. So sometimes we're just saying like, hey, let's just feel our body. And we'll do some different drills and assessments. And I'll say, maybe just close your eyes. Your bike's on a trainer. You're not going anywhere. You're not going to fall over. Just feel your body. For 2.5, 3 hours, I have you kind of locked into that. And it might not be the case when you leave the studio. Everything just kind of takes over your life, your kids, your family, your training. But for those moments, I've connected you to your body. And I do it rarely, but I get a chance to do it in the ice hockey goaltending coaching I do. I say, okay, we're going to go do some skating drills in the middle of the ice. I call it no man's, no woman's land. I said, there's no paint in the crease. There's no pucks and there's no people. There's nothing to load your computation or your cognitive payload. Feel your body. Feel what's going on. Are you imbalanced? And that exercise is super important. And I'm willing to bet a lot of riders that come in who have been racing bikes for a long time just haven't done that because life's too busy. It's one thing to say, I need to get your saddle in a perfect spot. That's low-hanging fruit. But it's another thing to connect your brain to your body and educate you that when you pedal that bike, that's a voluntary movement. It's not blinking, it's not chewing, it's not walking. You're choosing to do this. And you can get caught with some bad technique. How do we settle you in? And if you come in and you're posting your arms quite stiff, if you've chosen a pretty aggressive TT position, you've got all kinds of pain. If you can't breathe and get good oxygen flow, that's a big thing. So I've kind of continued to master the craft in that regard, down that path, and mentor with people that think that way. Because again, we kind of run or walk on a bike, yet our body is completely robbed of the particular sensory input that helps us automate walking and running. And that is force feedback in the feet. And it's a whole big thing that we talk about with our riders. Let's restore that Morse code in the feet and let's immediately get you in a good position for that. But then let's fine tune things. So that's why I think it's important. We're gonna make you a better athlete for sure. We're just gonna do it through the bike to begin with.
Right on. So I guess I kind of like you kind of touched on that, like 2.5 to 3 hours, like how long a bike fit would kind of normally take. And like obviously, like from my understanding, as you kind of elaborate on a little bit, it's not quite like going into a retail shop where it's like, yeah, that looks about right.
There's nothing wrong with, yeah, it looks about right for sure. That's okay, especially when we've just when we've gone through the racks to get your bells and your whistles and your bottle cages, and we want to get you out the door. Typically, well, let's back up. The world's elite bike fitters, they say that there is no steps 1 through 14. In fact, Steve Hogg, Australian bike fitter, says, I don't know if he's a fan of Fight Club, he says, but the one rule of bike fitting is there is no rules. Mm-hmm. And I think he's absolutely right, because that message is echoed every time I speak to a heavy hitter in this field. Like somebody doing it 40 years, feeding their family on this stuff. You have to sometimes attack certain things. In other words, if there was a step 1 through 14 in a protocol, sometimes you're jumping right to step 13 and then coming back to steps 1 through. But the process, whether I'm in my studio doing a mobile bike fit or the pop-up studios I do in Fort McMurray, it's always the same. You'll come in and I get to know you, I get to know your bike. More importantly, I leverage quite a few years of sales and marketing where I learn you as a person and I chameleon myself to you. If you come in and the first thing you're doing is jumping out of your street clothes to start riding your bike, like right there, I'm like, whoa, let's put on the brakes here. But I know how to get you on your bike. If I sense that you're looking for some information right away, and that's the kind of person you are, we'll jam out there. We'll talk a little bit about what is the gastroc soleus, what's its role. But generally it's the same thing. You'll come in, complete 2 pages of homework. It's a laundry list of things that you've experienced as a rider, injuries, things you're feeling, the goals, maybe it's your first 100K. Meanwhile, I'm mounting and measuring your bike and I'm observing your cleats. I'm looking at the forensics of things, and whether it's somebody else who's fit you, I don't care. It's a judgment-free zone. Whether you've installed your cleats practically backwards, whether your saddle's crooked, I don't care. What's there? I'll have mounted and measured your bike, so then we know what we started with and where we ended up. Once you've completed your homework, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to face you, and we're going to look at it and say, oh, okay, you spent a lot of time at a desk. These are the things that are an issue. Holy, look at that. Some of those are right there in your bike. I'll flip your shoes upside down and say, hey, I can improve blood flow, joint health, power transfer. I can reduce pressure on your saddle just with 1 cleat adjustment. How does that sound? Yeah, they like that. And then from there, I need to see you in motion. And maybe here's where I differ a lot. There's a Minnesota-based bike fitter named Chris Balzer. He's clinical, so he's got a medical background. The guy's a genius. He kind of bypasses that typical, won't call it typical, but that off-the-bike pre-fit assessment. I don't know if it's his opinion, but it's definitely mine. Sometimes that can create cognitive bias, that I'm expecting to see things. Oh, you can barely touch your toes. Maybe you're not fit for a position, or you have poor internal hip rotation, or something with your plantar flexion in your foot. I want to see you in motion on the bike, in context, because there can be muscle firing issues that are at play. So I'll watch you pedal for 2 to 3 minutes, thinking about what would Dave Howell see, what would he be looking at, and more importantly, with what I see, what am I going to do about it? I'll create a laundry list of things that I want to do. I'll take video from all 4 sides, and then I'll walk you through all that video. I'll say, hey, man, I want to raise your saddle up, bring it back. I want to get rid of that crazy upwards tilt. I want to slam your cleats back. Looks like there's something going on with your feet. I don't know just yet if it's cleat related or saddle related. I want to audition stem and bars because you're posting with your wrists. You're on 42 centimeter bars, but you're a petite, maybe 38 centimeter shoulder width. Let's get to work, but here's why. And sometimes, again, I have to skip sort of steps 1 through 14. I have to say, hey, let me just quickly raise your saddle right up before I even take video. And then come back and look at those knees. Or sometimes I have to correct technique. Remember, riders will come in and they won't be on their best or natural behavior. No one walks up my staircase to leave the studio on their tippy toes. But if they pedal like that, that definitely changes the dynamic of how they pedal and what interventions and adjustments we have to do. I then looked at you 2 to 3 minutes. We've gone through and discussed it. And it's imperative that the rider, A, believes in my bike fit philosophy, but then is in tune to me as a person, me as a practitioner and a support person, because then we go into rider feedback. The oldest technology in my studio is the rider's proprioception. How does this feel? How does this feel? But then there's lots of nonverbal communication. It's pretty cool, man. It happens weekly, if not daily. I'll be adjusting somebody's bike. Maybe they're on a dynamic fit bike that I have so I can roll dials and move it. And I'll see their left hand kind of move on the shifters. And I'll say, you didn't like that saddle tilt I did you? No, it doesn't feel right. Boom, let's knock it back. Or the opposite occurs. I make all these adjustments. They get on their bike and they go, they haven't uttered anything. Their elbows bend and they start pedaling way faster and smoother than they've ever done it. And it's like, do you like what we did? Yeah, dude. And that's important. So for 2.5, 3 hours, I'm locked right into. I'm not answering phone calls and emails. Occasionally I answer the front door because new saddles and stems are arriving. And I've had saddles arrive in the middle of a saddle session that go out the door at the same time.
Right.
But generally I have to be in tune to, because the experience is, it's generally void of any technology. I have some technological pieces I use for the right circumstances. Technology can be used on first time riders right up to semi-pros, doesn't matter, and professionals. But that's generally it. It's a history take, a global view. We do 2 or 3 rounds of changes, and then we do some corrective technique to your pedal stroke, because again, you can get away with bad technique simply extending the hip and flexing it in that notion. So some riders, it's huge, and that's the most important piece. And they look at me and say, well, wow, I didn't realize how bad I looked on the bike, but now I look and feel so good. And I consult them on what the brain actually does for the human. It's meant to keep you alive and keep you safe, and it doesn't necessarily love being on a bike. So you have to recondition it to settle in and absorb all of the sensory inputs so that you can pedal it further, longer, for later in your life.
Oh, that's really great. I love it. That's great. And I'm sure that's going to take, like you said, like 2 to 3 hours or so to go through the whole kind of process, right?
Yeah, 2 to 3 hours would seem expedited. Some of the world's best have you locked in for 7 to 8 hours, but I don't know that. I don't know that I need to have somebody attentive that way. But on that note, if needed, my clients have complimentary follow-ups, as many that are needed, and it's incredible. Like, I had one rider, really, really great athlete, triathlete, done a lot of different race events, was kind of, had a bit of a cognitive bias towards one adjustment, pretty common actually, was concerned about a saddle being too high. And on the second follow-up, a follow-up conducted at the cyclist pain cave, the rider, being a good host, welcoming into their home, says, I'm gonna get you a glass of water. Sounds cool. I made that one adjustment without them realizing it. It was a saddle a little bit further up. Rider hops on the bike and goes, ooh, this feels great. What'd you do? Cleat adjustment. No. But that's important. Like, we might not get it right in that first 2 to 3 hours. And make no mistake, we're not farting around. Like, I am absolutely busy. I'm often educating you while I'm adjusting your bike in those 2 to 3 rounds of changes. Sometimes you're explaining to me foot pain and you're wearing a shoe. And remember, most cycling shoes are this. They're descendants of an Italian men's dress shoe. They're very tapered, and to some degree they have a toe-up kick that's unnecessary. So sometimes I'm saying, you know what? I'm going to be busy on your bike. I got some shoes. You want to try them on? Let's experience what a wide shoe feels like. Wow, that's incredible. Holy. And sometimes we're kind of looking at, EMG graphs of the pedal stroke, so the muscle activation of the pedal stroke. I'm educating you while I'm very carefully adjusting your $10,000 bike. So the 2.5, 3 hours, they are used to the max. Like, there's no fussing around. And that's why you're completing homework, 2 pages, while I'm mounting and measuring your bike. Everything just moves. And at the end of a full work day, I am exhausted. I've done some marathon work sessions. They're 14 hours in length with no break for lunch. It's very fulfilling. It's super busy. And there's a part of me that just has to kind of turn the brain off, because I'm tuned into a rider for that very long time. There's something that happens, like I said, when that adjustment is just made perfectly or maybe isn't. And I need to kind of think to myself, I maybe need to see this cyclist again. And sometimes the cyclist needs to get better feedback in context. They need to climb with that mountain bike. They need to be on the open road. They need to battle through a false flat or a headwind. Maybe they just need to ride that bike on the highway where there is that threat, and need to feel comfortable steering that bike in that more aggressive TT position as they train. And so we know that. We're mutually agreeing, like, I'm saying, hey, these are the changes I'm going to make. Hey, you know what? Some of these changes aren't actually working. I'm not seeing your knee path move differently. Let's move into coaching and cueing. And then boom, 2.5 hours comes up. And I'm like, you know what? I still think we have work to do. Some sessions end in a to be continued fashion, and that we're ordering a part I don't carry. I have loads of stems, bars, bar tape. I have the whole 9 yards. But sometimes we need a seat post with more offset. Bike might be a little too small. Sometimes we just need something a little bit different that takes a little while. So that's common too, where a rider's circling back and we're making some adjustments.
Absolutely. And I mean, are we going to be seeing you out at like some events this year too? Like, whether it's even a cycling or in triathlon?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm in discussion with some of the organizers of PTO to be out there. I would have liked to be at this, past week's Estida Classic if I could. I love being out at events, seeing riders, cheering on my clients, and being there, getting out of the studio, getting some sunshine.
Yeah.
And it's a chance to have some of these one-on-one conversations, because I think, like I said, bike fitting, like goalie coaching, it's a philosophy, and people have to agree with that philosophy. I've mentored with some of the world's best goalie coaches, and they have a job to do. Some of them have never played in the NHL, yet they have to lead a horse to water to a multimillionaire who's got to make those decisions. And sometimes it just takes a conversation to be like, man, I connect with that Cody guy. I dig him. You know, he's a weird guy. I like that. That's cool. But I know I know he's going to do a good job, because there's only so much that my referrals or my website or the articles that we've done together, you and I, that'll communicate. Sometimes it's like, I had a good fit previous or a bad fit. I don't want to get fit maybe in a public environment like a bike shop. So somebody can just kind of have that conversation and do that. And I'm always taking phone calls where people say, Cody, what is a bike fit? What's going to happen? And then once they leave the conversation, they go, okay, cool. I'm going to visit your website. I'm going to book with you. So yeah, that would be very much where I want to kind of, just get out there and see people, and you know, watch riders go by and go, ooh, saddle too low, saddle too high. But yeah, I definitely want to get out to as many events as I can.
That's fantastic. Well, I mean, Cody, thank you so much for joining us today on Tri Talks, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you again in person in the summer, and hopefully even at PTO.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it as well. And I hope if listeners of the podcast have any questions, they can reach out to me if it's something where they're questioning their fit, or they have a great fit and they just want it to be double checked. Come on in. Sometimes 2 mils of saddle setback is like a game changer. So happy to help.